Story 1. I was taking a cross-country road trip with a colleague. We found ourselves driving on a major highway through West Texas. Even the main roads in that area were incredibly desolate. There had been a truck stop or a gas station about every 100 miles, and every single one was solitary, with no other buildings anywhere in sight. These weren't really towns, just places to get more gas so you could make it to the next gas station. It was pretty late at night, and she had been driving for about 4 hours. I can usually drive for 8 before I get tired because I go on frequent road trips, but she could only manage 4 or 5 before it was my turn again. We were also getting low on gas, at about a quarter of a tank, and you learn from road travel to always fill up when you get the chance. So, she was looking for a gas station as we drove along. It's really corny, but we were talking about fate and destiny and some other weird stuff at the time. That kind of conversation always gets me keyed up and worried, so I was trying to change the subject. She took an exit while we were talking, and I got out my coffee mug so I could fill it up for my turn driving. We pulled into a typical Nojaville gas station, just the station and a trailer out back, which I assume, thinking back, was probably where the people who owned it lived. There was another car parked in front of the doors off to one side. We got out, still talking, and walked up to the double doors, each of us grabbing a door handle. The doors were locked. I turned and looked around to see if there was a sign. Sometimes places will put up a back in 5 minutes notice, and that's when I noticed several things in succession. The coffee maker inside was halfway done brewing a fresh pot. The monitors that showed the store were visible from the outside, where we were, but all of them were showing static, and there was a splash of bright red on the closed door in the back of the place. I suddenly realized I was looking at a huge streak of blood with handprints in it. Every hair on my neck stood up. My friend began shaking the door, yelling, "We need to get gas." But I had already turned and walked away from the doors. "We have to leave now." I grabbed her arm and started propelling her back to the car. That's when I noticed the other car in the lot. It had no plates, it was dingy and had dents. There was an empty gun rack in its window. I ran to the car, dragging her with me. She seemed to take forever to open her door and get in. She had the keys the whole time. She kept saying, "But we need gas," while I tried to explain to her that there was real blood in there. After what seemed like a year, she pulled the car out. When we were backing up, I saw through the windows that the back door in the gas station was opening. We had pulled away before anyone came out. Thankfully, I freaked out until we were 20 miles down the highway. I tried to call the police but had no signal. I didn't get a phone signal until we had driven about 40 miles and got to another truck stop. Again, not on its own, just a building sitting by itself in the middle of nothingness. I called the cops and they thanked me, and I never heard anything more about it. To this day, I feel like if I hadn't freaked out, we probably would have met the robber or whoever was in the back room of the place. I also wish I would have been able to find out what the hell happened there. It was a Chevron station somewhere, in the western part of Texas, at least within about 100 miles or so of the signs for those places, on Route 10. Story 2. This happened about 5 years ago on a road trip I'll never forget. I was driving with my friend Ryan from Michigan down to North Carolina. He figured we'd take the long way through the mountains to make it scenic and to save on tolls. We weren't in a rush, so we let the GPS guide us even when it rerouted us onto smaller roads. Somewhere in West Virginia, we took what looked like a normal exit. The GPS said it would connect us back to the interstate eventually. At first it seemed fine, just back roads, thick trees, and the occasional farmhouse. But then it got weirder. The road narrowed, and we hadn't seen another car in maybe half an hour. By the time my gas light came on, I was starting to worry. Out there aren't many options if you run out. Finally, we saw a faded green sign with peeling paint. It pointed to some little town I'd never heard of. We figured there had to be a gas station, so we followed it. The road curved down into a valley, and pretty soon we were rolling through a small main street, if you could even call it that. All the houses and storefronts looked abandoned, with sagging porches and boarded-up windows, the whole 9 yards. But there were people. That was the weird part. But they weren't doing anything. They were just standing on porches, leaning in doorways, and sitting in plastic chairs with their heads turned toward us. Not one of them waved. Not one of them looked away when we passed. They just stared. I joked to Ryan that we'd found the wrong side of the mountains, but honestly, I felt sick to my stomach. There was something in their eyes that didn't feel like curiosity. It felt like hostility, like we didn't belong there. At the end of the street was a gas station, old with a single pump, the kind with rolling numbers instead of a digital screen. The lights inside flickered, but we needed gas, so I pulled in. Ryan stayed with the car while I went inside. The bell on the door made this weak little chime when I opened it. Behind the counter was an old man, skinny with gray hair, a wrinkled face and eyes that didn't blink enough. I said, "Pump one, $20, and set the bill on the counter. He rang it up without saying anything. When he handed me the receipt, he leaned forward just slightly and said, in the quietest voice, "Don't stay here after dark." It sent a shiver through me. The way he said it, like he wasn't supposed to, like somebody might hear. I didn't even respond, I just nodded, took the receipt, and got out as fast as I could. Ryan looked confused. "Why'd you rush out like that? Just get in the car, we're leaving." We barely let the tank fill halfway before I slammed a nozzle back, jumped in the driver's seat, and pulled onto the road. That's when I noticed the headlights. At first it was just another car, maybe a block back. I figured it was nothing, but as we wound through the narrow mountain roads, those headlights stayed glued to us. Every turn, every curve, every hill, always the same distance. "Behind, dude, that car's been following us since the station," Ryan said. I didn't answer, my hands were tight on the wheel. I sped up. They sped up. I slowed on a sharp curve. They slowed down. We drove like that for miles. No other cars, no signs of life, just us and those headlights on our tail. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Finally, after what felt like forever, we saw a sign for the interstate. I took the exit as fast as I could, tires squealing. We merged onto the highway, and for a second, I thought maybe we'd lose them in the traffic. But there was no traffic, just us, the empty road, and those headlights still behind us. Half a mile later, out of nowhere, the car veered off into a different exit. No blinker, no hesitation. Ryan and I sat in silence for a long time after that. Eventually he said, "What did that guy in the gas station say to you?" I just kept my eyes on the road and told him the truth. To this day, I don't know if that car was just a coincidence or if the locals were planning something. But I know one thing, I'll never take a random exit in the mountains again. Asterisk. Story 3. This encounter happened in the summer of 2006 when I was 20 years old. I didn't get my driver's license until January of that year, and driving opened up so many doors for me that I took a lot of solo road trips to my friends' houses in the New England and Mid-Atlantic states. I also looked young for my age and was often mistaken for a high school student in my early 20s. I was driving alone on I-78 on a random July day on my way to visit my friend in southern Pennsylvania for a long weekend. Her parents were away, and we had the house to ourselves and were planning on drinking. Hot tubbing and watching Planet Earth Drunk It had just come out. Maybe run around some cornfields at night. I was so excited and had a great drive listening to good music. It was a beautiful day for driving. Right after I crossed the border from New Jersey into Pennsylvania, I stopped at one of the first rest stops to get gas and snacks for the last part of my drive. I've tried to figure out which rest stop this was, and I can't ID it, but it was a gas station with a large mini-mart. Opposite the gas station was the on-ramp back to I-78 West, and parallel to the on-ramp was a dirt road, which comes into play later. I was heading into the store when a man in his late 30s or early 40s approached me. He was a stocky guy, decently tall and Fivon, and he had on a black plain t-shirt and jeans with dark brown hair and a mustache and goatee. He had come out of a black pickup truck parked a few spaces away from my car. He had a super intense gaze and immediately creeped me out. He just had a crazy energy about him. I don't really get vibes from people that often, but this was so strange. He stood too close. His gaze was crazy direct and focused, and his word choice was strange. It immediately set off all my alarms. He asked if I was from the area despite my Connecticut license plate, where I was headed, and if I knew anything fun to do because he had plans later and time to kill beforehand. He invited me to go play mini-golf or watch a movie with him. I didn't answer any of his questions, declined his invitation to hang out, and told him I didn't know the area, and walked away towards the store. I was blown away that he asked me to go somewhere with him. It was so random and uncomfortable. As I was walking away, he actually screamed out, "You're gorgeous." The volume and tone made my hair stand on end. It was super aggressive and inappropriate, and he startled a family walking out of the store. It was so loud. I didn't turn around but went inside. He came into the store shortly after and was staring at me, so I went to use the bathroom and stayed in for at least 10 minutes texting my friend about this creep. When I came out, he wasn't in the store anymore. So I took my time buying drinks and snacks, or bike crawlers and trail mix being my obligatory road trip food, and went out to gas up my car. I was relieved his car was gone and started thinking about the rest of my drive and getting excited to see my friend. When I pulled up to the road to get back on the highway, I heard someone persistently honking his horn and saw this creep stopped on the dirt road parallel to the on-ramp in his truck, honking, shouting, and waving at me to drive over to him. He was directly facing the gas station and had been waiting for me to pull up. I immediately freaked out and jumped on the on-ramp back to I-78. He pulled onto the highway after me and I called my friend, extremely scared. I drove so fast and probably dangerously, and looking back, I'm lucky that I didn't get into an accident, but I didn't know what to do. He didn't follow me for that long, and I think after a few exits, he pulled off. My friend and I had a backup plan that if I saw his car again, she would direct me to a police station the next town over from her house instead of going directly there and leading some freak to us. I didn't see the car again and went to my friend's, but the last hours of my drive, I was extremely tense and anxious. I remember checking my mirrors regularly for this black pickup truck. It all ended well. I got to my friend's house safely and we had a nice weekend. The encounter was definitely creepy, but over the years, I didn't put much thought into it. A few years ago, I was talking with a friend who was big into serial killers and mentioned my encounter, jokingly suggesting that this was a serial killer I had met, and told her my experience. She was fascinated and wanted to Google active serial killers in the Pennsylvania area at the time. The first hit was for Adam Leroy Lane, and he looked almost exactly like the man I met back in 2006. Obviously, it could be my mind filling in the blanks, but the basic characteristics were tall but stocky, brown hair with mustache and goatee, and the time an aerial match. In my memory, he was a little bit slimmer than the pictures, and it was 2006, not 2007, when he was actually convicted of murdering women. Still, it's an odd coincidence and one I've never forgotten. Story 4. This happened on Saturday. My girlfriend Tess, my puppy Jack, and I were all getting ready for a road trip. We were planning on meeting some friends at their house and then starting the road trip from there. On our way to their house at around 11 a.m., a white car with all tinted windows cut us off and brake checked us close enough that I had to slam the brakes and swerve to avoid an accident. In the immediate fury, I honked and flipped the driver off. I wish I hadn't done this. Immediately, the driver rolls down his window and waves his hand over. He slows down to go back to the other lane so that our cars are parallel to one another. The driver is gesturing wildly and yelling at us while we continue driving down the avenue. I proceed to make gestures to calm down and then try to ignore him and continue driving. He continues driving right next to us. Eventually, I try speeding up and he revs in front of me and tries brake checking me again. At this point, I swerve into the other lane and he again slows down to match my vehicle's speed. He is still gesturing and screaming while I try to ignore him. Suddenly, he reaches in his lap and I notice he's holding a glass bottle. He throws it and it shatters at the side of my vehicle. Tess is hysterical at this point and the puppy is hidden under the passenger seat. I go into adrenaline mode and try turning into different streets. As the chase ensues, he is following close behind when he throws another glass bottle that shatters against my back window. I tell Tess to call the police as we speed down a 2-lane street and up a hill. She calls 911 as I come to a stop at the light at the top of the hill. The guy chasing us slows down to a stop behind us. Suddenly, he hops out of his vehicle and in my rearview mirror, I see him reach back into his car and grab something and put it in his shorts. He begins walking toward my side of the car. As the car in front of me drives away, I haul ass out of there, slam the gas, and turned to the next avenue. Within a minute, he has caught back up to us, and I am now on speaker with 911, explaining the situation and giving them details of his car and appearance. Tess is crying as we speed down a busy avenue, weaving in between cars at 20 above the speed limit. I'm updating the 911 lady with where we are, and she tells me to drive to the station. At the next red light, he yells, now audibly, "Do we have a problem? Don't flip me off." I'm trying to gesture that we don't have any problem. He is still trying to get me to get out of the car. The light is still red and he again hops out of his vehicle. I again floor it through the red and he continues chasing me as I make my way toward the police station. We're now accelerating and braking at each other as he tries to drive me off the road. I make gestures that he should continue following, hoping to get him to the station. About a block from the police, we get stuck in a busy intersection. There are many cars around as he again walks up to my car. This time I'm boxed in and Tess is panicking. I'm looking for any escape options to no avail. The drivers around us notice and many put their windows up and lock their doors. He comes right up to my window, slaps it with his palm, and asks one more time if there was a problem. I again adamantly say, no. The 911 lady tells me to not engage over the phone speaker. He says, good, gets back into his car, and then speeds away 20 minutes into this horrible car chase experience. We ended up meeting with the cops, and they say there was nothing they could do, even though I updated them with more details of his direction and where he was last. We calmed down and then continued our road trip. Asterisk story 5. It was a long time ago, before cell phones were prevalent, and I was a mum in my early 30s who had just driven our kids to the pediatrician. The Macon, Georgia doctor's office was an hour away from our home, and I was just taking the two youngest of my three, then ages 1 and 3 years old, to our scheduled appointment. Because we lived so far away, their office always gave us the last 2 appointments of the day, and we were grateful. The doctor had just built a new building off a fresh burp of the highway, so the location was quite isolated in every direction, but it was a very nice facility compared to his old spot by the hospital there. His new building was also pretty far back on the new lot. My car, a black Jeep Cherokee we had owned for 2 years, was one of only 4 or 5 cars in the parking lot when I arrived. I parked near the front door, removed the kids from their car seats, and for the next hour or so, we waited. Then we saw the doctor, paid, and finally exited back outside. Mine was the only car left in the lot as I loaded the children in their seats for our trip back home. But as the receptionist locked the front glass doors, my car somehow wouldn't start when I turned the key. There was just an odd clicking noise. Gathering the children once again, I knocked on the door until someone allowed us back in and asked to borrow their phone to call a nearby garage for service. I found one in the phone book, and the man said that he would come, but that it might be a bit. So, I told him my location, left to go back out to the car, rolled down all the windows and loaded the children back into their seats once more. As we waited, soon we watched as all the lights were turned out in the building again and everyone left. Their cars departing one by one from behind the building somewhere, leaving us now completely alone in the parking lot. As it was still light, I spent a lot of that time trying to tend to the children, digging through our car for snacks in a bottle, making sure that they weren't getting too hot, etc. Although the service station attendant said that it was probably going to be quite a while, I was pleasantly surprised when a truck pulled into the empty parking lot pretty soon and a man got out of his pickup, smiled and nodded at me, and he said he was going to raise the hood. He was middle-aged and a bit scruffy, but quite frankly, many gas station attendants sometimes looked that way, especially at the end of the day, and I was grateful when he began doing something under the hood almost immediately. I sat down again, in the driver's seat with the door open, waiting for him to tell me to try the engine, but he seemed to be taking a long time checking the connections, and I longed for him to just grab jumper cables, yet he never did. Without getting out of the car, I asked him what he thought was wrong, and he said, "Oh, it's just a loose wire, not the battery," and continued whatever he was doing. I couldn't see his face at all from where I was sitting, but his hands were slightly. More than once, he said that it was merely a loose wire and if I would just come up here really quick, he would show me which one it was so it would never happen again. I remember kind of smiling and shaking my head, saying that sadly there was no reason to show me anything as I didn't know anything about cars. I just thanked him and continued to stay in the driver's seat again, just waiting for the inevitable signal to try and start the ignition that was most surely coming at any moment. At one point, I remember thinking that he was definitely flirting as he spoke, but I was trying above all to be polite and kind as he was indeed helping us. We were hot and tired and miserable, and truthfully, I was distracted with the kids. Oddly enough, he started to sound a little frustrated with me because I wouldn't come up and look at the engine. I remember thinking that I certainly didn't want to make him mad where he left us there all alone with the sun sinking so quickly. And then the strangest thing happened. Another truck suddenly pulled into the desolate parking lot, and as it did, the nice guy working underneath my hood suddenly slammed it shut, ran to his truck, started it, and drove away very quickly without even saying a word of goodbye. I was both confused and a little anxious when he did this because I didn't know who was now arriving. I even remember feeling a little frightened that he had suddenly left me there alone with two little ones, defenseless. Why couldn't he at least stay and speak to whoever was parking next to me now? It certainly seemed like the southern gentlemanly thing to do. I looked around and was very aware once again that there were no visible cars on the road, no homes, no businesses nearby, and the sun was continuing to set quickly. As this new, also unmarked pickup truck pulled in next to me, I got out of the car once again, this time more apprehensively. Upon exiting though, he immediately introduced himself, and his name and voice seemed to match who I had spoken to on the phone much earlier. He then actually called me by name, apologized for being so late, and finally smiled and stared towards the road, pointing and asking who the man was that had just left so suddenly. Relieved and unfazed, I just smiled back in surprise and told him, well, I don't know. I thought all this time he was you. And we both laughed slightly as he then grabbed jumper cables, walked to the front of my car, raised the hood, and started to work. I immediately sat back in the driver's seat once more, suddenly grateful that with luck, the air conditioner would be blowing full blast shortly, and once again checking the children, while listening for the familiar words, "Try it." I had my back completely turned towards the children when he surprised me by suddenly coming to the driver's side door. In the strangest voice, he said, ma'am, is this yours? And when I looked into his hands, he was holding a long, thin, dagger-like looking device that was about 1.5 feet in length. It appeared to be very old and covered with reddish rust. On one end, it had tiny circular small finger holes as if it was a mix of a long, thin sword and scissors oddly combined. I remember being amazed but not frightened, and I asked where he had found them. Under the hood, he replied. I said just matter-of-factly that I'd never seen them before, but how weird was it that those things had somehow been stuck and undiscovered in my car for all those years, and shook my head in surprise. He continued to stand there and stare at them unbelievingly, and he looked oddly pale, too, like he couldn't find the words to speak for a bit, just continuing to stare at the unusual object. Honestly, I didn't care one bit about it. All I could think of was getting the car going, letting me pay him the cost, and leaving. He didn't say anything else, just quickly set them on the curb, started his truck, and then signaled for me to start the Jeep, and when it immediately caught, my 3-year-old cheered. Grateful, I quickly turned on the air conditioner full blast, rolled up all the windows, aimed the air vents back towards the back seat, and reached for my purse to pay out. I stood up and took a few steps to meet him so I could hear the amount now owed. With both of our vehicles running, he came back around to my driver's side, but instead of handing me the bill, irritated me a bit by walking right past me and picking up that weird object once more. Ma'am, he said slowly, I want you to look at these one more time, and held them out for closer inspection. This time, I moved a bit closer and actually really looked in his hands. The item still appeared incredibly large, possessing an almost bayonet-looking quality, except for the strangely small 2 loops on the end. I had never seen anything like it and told him so. As he held it, he spoke quietly and slowly to me, as if trying desperately to make me understand something that was somehow still going over my head. These weren't hidden somewhere in the engine, ma'am. They hadn't been there very long at all, 'cause they were sitting right on top. They must have just been put there. I shook my head no and half smiled as I said, but they're obviously very old and rusty. To which he pointed more closely and replied, yeah, but see how sharp they are. These look like they've just been sharpened. And when I looked down, he was right. The long, skinny, dagger-like shape was unusual, but by far the oddest quality was just how sharp it appeared to be. The edges at the tip where the rust had been removed were gleaming silver. As I paid him, his final words to me were, "Ma'am, I don't know what was about to happen here, but I'm really glad I pulled up when I did." He quietly thanked me when taking the payment, told me that I probably need to call the police when I got home, and then asked me where I wanted the item. I didn't want to touch it, didn't want to take it at all, but I released the back window, so he could place it inside. We both then left the lot together, he turning one way, I turned the other towards a small winding highway that would lead home, still an hour away. I did indeed contact the Macon police the moment that we arrived home, and I got the children inside safely. But although they listened politely, they declined when I offered to bring the scissor-like thing to them later. The officer I spoke to said that they sounded as if they were specialized surgical shears from my description and measurements on the phone, which I found quite disturbing, as you can imagine. I remember wondering how he would even know that and why he would say that. I had tried so carefully not to touch any of the surfaces, hoping that they might be able to lift prints or test it for blood if they wanted. But the story seemed to bore him a bit, and he didn't seem interested. His attitude insinuated that, as there was no longer an emergency, it was of no importance. Now, at the very end of the call, as if to wind things up, he did say that it sounded as if I was very lucky, and that I might want to keep the shears for a few days, just in case somebody from his office got back with me later, but that was all. I wrapped them carefully in newspaper and placed them in the brick storage unit behind our house. And there they remained for several more years, untouched, until we finally moved away, and I, finally not wanting to bring them across several states, reluctantly threw them in the trash. Around that time though, if you look through old news reports, women were going missing all over Georgia. Some bodies were eventually found, but others remain missing to this very day. I have often wondered what would have happened if the service station attendant hadn't arrived when he did, if my children would still have a mother, if I would still have my son and daughter, and if I would have missed all these years with them. I guess I'll never know. But I learned something very important about myself that day. I had always felt that I was pretty aware of my surroundings and pretty good at reading people and staying safe. But because I was exhausted and tired and hot and stranded in a different city, my common sense and intelligence simply left me for a bit and wasn't working very well at that time, and many of my friends and family still think that our car trouble that day and my lack of awareness could easily have cost us our lives. Story 6. I'm originally from Portland, Oregon, and got a great opportunity to take a scholarship at a school in Washington, D.C. My family doesn't come from money, and to ship my car and fly out there with all of my stuff would have cost several thousand. Plus, I was so afraid the airline would break my cello that I got my scholarship for and was still making payments on, so that wasn't the move. I decided to pack my 1991 Toyota full of all my stuff and hit the road. I'd mapped it out that it would take 4 days if I hustled and cost me around $500 total with gas, eating off the dollar menu, and sleeping in my car. Good stuff. Fast forward, one whole day and I'm like, screw every single bit of this. I was at a pace of 16 hours a day driving, just starting my second day. There was nowhere good to sleep in my car out in the middle of nowhere that runs around I-90. The only marginally okay place I found was the parking lot of a small hospital somewhere in Missoula, Montana, I think, and it felt so sketchy to be sleeping in my car. I can't put my finger on what exactly made me feel some type of way, but the further I got from Oregon, the tags on my car, the more I felt like I drew the attention of people. I was just running off of adrenaline, covering 800 miles a day, calling my parents at every rest stop and leaving voicemails on the machine, letting them know where I was. Cell phones were just starting to be popular and they were hella expensive, and I didn't have one. It was physically and emotionally exhausting, and I was so ready to be at my dorm and sleep in an actual bed again. My car wasn't super old, but it was a flood salvage and not the most reliable thing. It had 2 random engine lights permanently on, and I was so afraid it was going to break down and leave me stranded out in the badlands and barren stretches of nothing. If you've never made this trip, at least at this point in time, you need to pack cans of gas in your trunk because you would run out of gas with a full tank before you hit so much as a gas station in some places. I remember driving all day through nothing but literal tumbleweeds, sleeping on the side of the road, waking up and not seeing civilization again for a total of 12 hours worth of driving. Fast forward to Wyoming. I don't remember where, but I was near the South Dakota-Nebraska border. I was running low on cash due to a rock hitting my side mirror and breaking the glass, and I needed to buckle down to have enough for gas. A sign of some tiny church saying free community spaghetti dinner listed as that evening, and I was like, heck yeah, let's do this. It was a few hours until it started, but I figured I could stop by and introduce myself, help set up and enjoy that sweet, sweet spaghetti, and maybe they would let me take a plate to go to. Long story short, it was great. I met some really nice folk and ate some really good spaghetti. Everyone seemed so amazed at my journey. The pastor ended up asking me if I wanted to sleep there for the night. A lady chimes in that they would absolutely find some place for me. A third person chimed in that they had some cots down in the preschool in the basement and that I could use one of those. Heck yeah. So, the time rolls around, we finish cleaning up, everyone leaves the church, and I get shown to my cot. The inherent creepiness of sleeping on a cot in a dark preschool aside, no red flags at all. The cot was absolute magic compared to the van. I put a few of them together and made a nest out of pillows, and I was able to stretch out mostly comfortably. I woke up at some point in the night to hearing footsteps. It seemed like they were just kind of wandering around. I sat frozen, holding my breath like, what? And it hit me. I forgot to call my dad and tell him where I was. I was sleeping on a cot in the basement of a church I actually just realized I didn't even know the name of. I didn't even know what town I was in. Nobody knew where I was, and there's a stranger wandering around this dark church. I decided to try and get out of there. I quietly put my shoes on and tried to tiptoe opposite where I thought I heard someone. I felt such anxiety heading into the dark stairwell. I knew there was probably an emergency exit at the end of the hall in the stairwell, and I decided I would just start running. All of a sudden, I felt someone shout, "Hey," and grab the back of my shirt. I felt their cold hand on the exposed skin on my back, and they ripped a spaghetti strap. In some Houdini move, I'm still not sure how I managed. I slid out of the open button down without them being able to grab me again, and I kept running. It was too dark to see them, or where they came from. I didn't turn around and I didn't look back. I kept running up the hill in the dark. I lost one of my shoes and I cut my foot on something in the grass. But I didn't even care. I kept running with only one shoe until I got to my car and burned rubber through the empty parking lot. The only car to even be seen was a sedan in the pastor's driveway. I drove until the gas light came on, and I did not even get out to refill the tank until it was light out. Story 7. This happened back in the fall of 2009. I was 21 at the time, driving home from college for Thanksgiving break. I lived in upstate New York, but went to school in Massachusetts, so the trip was about 6 hours. A roommate and I decided to carpool to split the gas money. It was one of those days where the weather couldn't make up its mind. Sunny for a bit, then sudden bursts of rain. The roads were slick and the windshield wipers were on full speed every other hour. About halfway into the trip, maybe around the Vermont border, we saw a guy standing on the side of the highway with his thumb out. He had a beat-up backpack, wet jeans, and a hood pulled up. The rain was coming down pretty hard at that point, and I remember saying to my roommate, "Man, that sucks." Normally, I'd never pick up a hitchhiker. I grew up with all the classic warnings. Don't talk to strangers. Don't pick people up. You don't know what kind of crazy is out there. But something about seeing him out in the rain made me feel guilty. He looked miserable. My roommate shrugged and said, "Up to you." So, I pulled over. The guy jogged up to the car, opened the back door, and climbed in. He smelled like wet clothes and cigarettes. He muttered a quick thanks and dropped his bag on the seat next to him. For the first 20 minutes or so, it was normal. He didn't talk much, just stared out the window while the rain streaked across the glass. I asked where he was headed, and He said west in this flat voice that didn't really explain much. My roommate tried making small talk about the weather, music and whatever, but the guy barely responded. That's when things got weird. We were driving through a long stretch of highway with no exits, just trees on both sides, when I caught movement. In the rearview mirror, the hitchhiker had reached into his bag and pulled out a knife. Not a pocket knife, a hunting knife with a black handle and a blade that looked way too sharp. My chest tightened instantly. My roommate saw it too, because his eyes went wide and he stopped talking mid-sentence. The guy noticed us staring in the mirror and just said, real calm, "So, where are you guys headed?" It wasn't an innocent question. The way he asked it made every alarm bell in my head go off. I forced myself to keep my voice steady. Just heading home. A couple hours more. He nodded slowly, ran his thumb along the flat of the blade like he was testing it, and then leaned back against the seat. Long trip. Roads are dangerous, you know. Every muscle in my arms locked up. Finally, I said the first thing that came to my head. "Hey, I'm starving. You guys mind if we stop for food soon?" My roommate caught on immediately. Yeah, there was a diner a couple of miles back. Right, we could hit the next one. The hitchhiker didn't answer at first. He just kept looking out the window, tapping the flat side of the knife against his leg. Finally, he said, "Food, sounds good." I took the next exit I saw with a gas station and a small diner right off the ramp. My heart was hammering the whole time. I pulled into the lot, parked near the front, and shut off the engine. My roommate said casually, "Let's grab a booth." The hitchhiker looked at both of us for a second, then slid the knife back into his bag. "Yeah, let's go." He opened the back door, stepped out into the rain, and swung his backpack over his shoulder. The second his door shut, I didn't even think. I threw the car in drive and slammed the gas. My roommate yelled, "Go, go, go, go," and we shot out of the lot, tires spitting water behind us. I checked the mirror once we hit the on-ramp again. The hitchhiker was standing in the rain watching us, just standing there, bag on his shoulder, not running after us, not yelling, just staring. We drove for miles without saying anything, both of us shaking. Finally, my roommate muttered, "What the hell was that?" We never called the cops. We didn't know his name, and we weren't sure what we'd even report. Just that some guy had a knife. Maybe he wasn't planning to hurt us. Maybe he carried it for protection. But the way he pulled it out, the way he asked where we were headed, it didn't feel right. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if we hadn't thought of that diner. Story 8. A few years ago, my sister decided to have a surprise 30th birthday for her husband. Since he missed his senior prom, she decided to make that the theme of the party and even booked the same hall his prom was hosted in when he was a teenager. The problem is my brother-in-law grew up in basically the middle of nowhere. A small rural Missouri town that you have to leave the highway and travel down about 5 miles of heavily wooded back roads to get to. On top of it being so isolated, there's a rather large heroin problem out there, both using and dealing. It's a pretty potent cocktail, but my sister was determined to have the party there. The party was at 6 o'clock and my original plan was to drive out there with my sister and her friends to help set up. My sister was heavily pregnant at the time and needed all the help she could get, and then drive back home with her. However, got called into work and had to stay until 4 o'clock. So, I told my sister I would drive up by myself as soon as I was done. She warned me that it was pretty easy to get turned around on those country roads, but I had Google Maps to help me and didn't worry about it. The drive up was fine. It was late September, my favorite time of the year, and the scenery was surprisingly pretty. I found the place, no problem, and helped with some last-minute setup before my brother-in-law showed up. The party was a lot of fun and lasted until about 11 o'clock when the hall closed. I was one of the last people to leave, having stayed behind to help my sister and her friends stack chairs. My brother-in-law had overindulged at the open bar and had to be driven home by his friend. We ended up not actually heading out until almost midnight, and by that point, I was exhausted. My sister once again warned me about being careful on the back roads, but I'd gotten up there okay, so I wasn't too concerned about the drive home. I hugged her goodbye, hopped into my car, and started working my way back to the highway. Unfortunately, in my sleepy state, I misjudged which road I was supposed to turn off as I reached the exit for the highway and ended up turning down an entirely different road that ran parallel to it instead. It was another heavily wooded and narrow back road. I started looking for somewhere I could pull in to turn around. After driving maybe 200 yards, I spotted a gravel embankment and decided to pull in there so I could get turned around. I pulled in and made a sharp U-turn so I could head back up the road, and as I lifted my head to check no one was coming, I saw in my driver's side mirror a figure in a dark blue t-shirt and jeans, with black hair and a pale face illuminated in my brake lights. My heart jumped into my throat as I gasped in fright. After a second of pure panic, I realized that the pale face was actually a mask, one of those cheap plastic white ones you get at costume stores. I immediately felt like an idiot. It was almost October, so obviously this was a Halloween decoration. This embankment probably led to someone's driveway, and the family who lived there probably had tons of things just like it in their yard. I took a moment to unclench my hands from the steering wheel and let my heart rate get back to normal, and ended up catching a glimpse of the thing in my mirror again, and I noticed that the embankment didn't lead to a driveway. There was nothing else behind me but tall grass and trees. I briefly wondered why anyone would put a Halloween decoration out in the middle of nowhere. Then the decoration took a step forward. I slammed on the gas and shot forward, eventually getting back to the main road and onto the highway. I don't think I stopped shaking until I reached my town's city limits half an hour later. Looking back, I definitely wasn't in any danger. I was in a car, all the doors were locked, and I could have easily run down whoever that creep was if they tried anything. If they had gotten even one step closer when panic mode set in, that's probably what I would have done. It was probably just a kid or local druggie in a crappy mask giving motorists a good scare and not really thinking about the consequences. But still, it was definitely one of the creepiest moments of my life, and I'm still nervous driving down secluded country roads at night these days. Story 9. This happened about a week ago. I went on a road trip to take a friend of mine home to Colorado. He wanted to fly back, but I really wanted to go on a road trip. I live in Ohio, so we had to go through Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, and Kansas, a 22-hour road trip to get there, not including the rest stops. I had never traveled this far before in a car. I've flown to Florida once or twice, and I didn't see myself getting an opportunity like this in the future. Anyways, I drove most of the way because, well, I love to drive and nobody seemed to be concerned with it. The person I was taking home, Travis, said if we needed to switch, it wouldn't be a big deal. At this point, I've been behind the wheel for nearly 12 hours, and maybe it was because I was tired, even though I didn't feel tired. But the creepiest thing happened. I needed gas, and there was this station closed. So it was dark, aside from the lights from the pump and a street light at the gas station. I was creeped out, but I also wasn't concerned because I hadn't had any problems beforehand. So, I do my business with no issues. Now, this gas station was different than what I'm used to. To get gas, you do the usual. Select the type of gas you want, but as soon as you pull the nozzle from the pump and into your car, you then have to pull a lever up and then start to pump the gas. It took me a while of fidgeting in order to realize this. I've seen it in a movie, but right as I realized this, I hear a voice call from beside the closed building of the gas station. I don't remember exactly what it said, but if I had to guess, it was a hey or over here, definitely male. When I set the pump to where I don't have to hold the trigger, I looked up and saw nothing there. Again though, I was tired, so I didn't pay any attention to it. This was a deserted gas station, and I went on a witch hunt to find this gas station for this post. I think it was a Sinclair gas station. It has a dinosaur for a logo. But about halfway through, I hear it again. Another male voice calling out to me. Maybe he thought I was alone because my roommate was sleeping in the back and Travis had laid the front seat down. Stupid me didn't feel like stopping again. So, I ignored it and kept pumping while looking at my phone. Next, I hear the man whistling for me like I was a dog, and the absolute worst feeling comes over me. Something I've genuinely never felt before, but it was a mix of fear and oh shit. I literally felt my stomach drop. I looked up and sure enough, there was a man dressed in a brown coat with the hood up and red shorts. I don't even know why I remember that, but after I looked up, he let out a yell. Hey, look at me when I'm talking to you. It was so loud that my roommate lying in the back seat shot up and then rolled the window down. You good? At this point, The man was speed walking over towards me, but as soon as my roommate put the window down, the man turned around and booted it back to the back of the building. I heard a car start and gravel fly as he got out of there. I didn't look at his car, or van, or whatever he drives because I was immediately stuck in my place, and I think my roommate knew it too. I know a lot of people try to plan for this type of stuff, especially women like myself. They have a fully thought out idea of how to handle it, what they're going to say, where they're going to run, maybe even who to call. Even I did, but when it actually happens, we're clueless. Stuck in fear, and I was stuck. I'm just glad my roommate was there and that I wasn't alone. After I filled up the car, Travis was nice enough to take over for me. I don't know what the man wanted or why he was yelling at me or even walking towards me, but I don't ever want to experience something like that ever again. Story 10. When my daughter was 2, I was having a tough time as a single mother and decided to take a road trip up Highway 1. I made reservations in Trinidad at a cool cabin in the woods within walking distance of the beach. Before I left, my stepfather gave me a loaded .38 revolver, which I stored under the driver's seat. Sometime after driving through San Francisco, it was very late and dark and nobody was on the highway. My daughter was sleeping peacefully in her car seat next to me. Back then, we could legally have car seats in the front. I noticed a car coming up behind me and passing, but then slowing down, driving alongside me. I sped up and slowed down, but could not shake him. I looked over and this guy had his interior light on and was furiously gesturing for me to pull over. I knew I had to find a safe place. There was nobody else on the road and I was running low on gas. There was just nothing on this highway for miles. I kept driving, but this guy would not leave me alone. I was getting very frightened, but the mama bear was coming out, and I was getting very angry as well. I knew he could see my kid who was still sleeping. Finally, there was an exit up ahead, and a gas station in the middle of nowhere. So, I took the exit with the guy closely following me. I wasn't sure what to do. The gas station was brightly lit, but had no customers. I didn't feel that it was safe to pull in, so I slowly passed it, drove further into the dark, deserted landscape, pulled into a large dirt area, and drove quite a ways off the highway with him following. Absolutely nothing around. I knew I was in big trouble and I needed to take control, and wanted to put him in a vulnerable situation. I was in full protective mode and I was pissed. I stopped the car, grabbed the gun, and jumped out, blocking the car behind me. As he pulled up, I ran around to the passenger side and waited. He then got out of his car and quickly moved towards me, and I suddenly held the gun up visible in the moonlight. He came to a halt, surprised, and then I leveled the gun across the car, taking aim, and waited. He stood there weighing his options, and then turned around, got back in his car and left. Not a word was spoken. Totally freaked me out.